Pollen tubes, pollen tubes. Why are there pollen tubes? Well, pollen grains land on the stigma. They get there somehow by wind or by animal, usually, or self-pollination. But the pollen grain is way up on the roof. It's got to take its sperm cells down to the ovary where the egg cells are in ovules. And so pollen grains grow a pollen tube. Now, if you're looking at this, you might be thinking, where's the flower? Well, this poor little guy was tricked. He was artificially stimulated to grow his tube outside of a flower. So here's the pollen grain proper. Here is the pollen tube, goes to about right there. And there are 1, 2, 3 objects inside it. Let's confirm that those objects did in fact come from inside the pollen grain proper. Here we have a couple of pollen grains just barely starting to grow their pollen tubes. Very short little pollen tube. It looks like we got 1, 2, 3 things. One is just leaving the pollen grain proper, heading on out. 2 are still in the pollen grain proper. Here we have 2 items in the pollen grain, 1 that's out in the pollen tube here. 2 in the grain, 1 in the pollen tube. Here we have just 1 left in the pollen grain and 1, 2 in the pollen tube. I couldn't get the pollen tube in focus at the same time as the pollen grain, but you get the idea there, I think. And so as we come back to our pollen grain, the first one we saw, all 3 of these objects came out of the pollen grain proper, entered the pollen tube, and if all had gone well for these guys, they would have been headed for an ovule down in the ovary. Oh well. Anyway, what are these 3 things? Well, let's see. One is the vegetative cell nucleus, now known as the tube nucleus. Where is that? It's the leader of the pack. Yes, the leader of the pack, the tube nucleus, the nucleus of the vegetative cell, which now includes this entire extension here, the vegetative cell, and that's its nucleus. And what's it believed to be doing? Believed to be directing the growth of this pollen tube down toward an ovule. It's probably wondering right now, what in the world is going on here? Something's wrong. Anyway, these 2 guys, what are they? They are the what? The sperm cells. And in this one right here, we see the pollen grain. It's pollen tube growing off of this way. Pollen grain, pollen tube. What's this cell right here? It's not a cell, it's a nucleus. And so, yeah, I gave myself a trick question. Anyway, it's a nucleus of a cell. Which cell would that be? It's the nucleus of the vegetative cell, which includes the contents of the pollen grain and the pollen tube. The pollen tube being an extension of the vegetative cell. But what nucleus is this? It is the tube nucleus or the vegetative cell nucleus. And what are these 2 guys? The sperm cells. The sperm cells following right behind, looking for that ovule that they will never find in this case. Oh well. And so, wow, what do we got here? We've got a slide called pollen tubes, but it shows real pollen tubes. Now, where are we? We're at the top center of the flower. What is this part of the flower? Is this? It is the what? It is the stigma, the top of the what? The pistil. You say, is it floating in air? No, it's hollow inside. It's hollow inside. So this is the top center of the stigma, and this is the inside hollow part that you can see at the lower right and lower left. What do we see stuck in the stigma? We see lots and lots of pollen grains. And this is wild lily. And how is the lily pollen brought to this wild lily stigma? Well, lilies have pretty petals. So it must have been some type of animal, right? Some type of bug or bee of some kind. Here's a closer look at the stigma and the pollen that is sticking to the stigma. And the pollen grains, oh boy, they look sliced and diced. How come they look sliced and diced? Well, it's because they've been sliced and diced by the knife that made this slice. Here we are up closer. We can see some pollen grains, and some of them, again, sliced and diced up. I guess everyone in the picture that way, I think. Anyway, back to a little bit lower magnification. And so now, this is still the stigma. We're kind of coming over to the right. This is the hollow interior of the stigma. We see all these pollen grains, and we see all this wispy looking kind of bluish stained stuff. You can see some up here. What is that? Those are all what? Pollen tubes growing from these pollen grains. And so here we have again the outside of the stigma over to the right. This is the hollow interior. There's still see pollen grains out here, and all these wispy looking things are what? Pollen tubes growing down, down, down. And here we have it again. We're narrowing down now. We're now pretty much below the stigma. There's a little bit left of the stigma, but now this part is the more narrow part of the pistil called the what? The style. And what are all these coming down the hollow center of the style? Pollen tubes. Lots and lots of pollen tubes. And last picture, we're now definitely down in what part of the pistil? The style. Yes, the style. Here's one side of the style. Here's the other side of the style. Here's the hollow center of the style. What are all these things? It looks like kind of like a waterfall. What are these things coming down the hollow center of the style? Yes, lots and lots and lots of pollen tubes, all heading toward, they would hope, toward the ovule. All right, that's it for this one, folks.